Greetings, everyone. This is Keith Billick here to welcome you to another episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast, the last one of 2019. I hope everyone has had a great holiday season. Get some time to spend, some relaxing days with your loved ones or your friends, or at least just your banjo. Hopefully you've had some banjo bonding time involved. And as far as 2019 goes, looking back at it, say what you want about anything else that happened this year, but at least in terms of the podcast, it's been going really well. I've gotten to interview a lot of really amazing players, some of my personal favorites, and all of you listeners have really been a really great part of it too, not only for the positive feedback I get, but also for supporting the podcast. The main way to support it and keep the show going is to visit the Patreon page. That's patreon.com/banjopodcast. And if in case you missed it, the newest addition to that is super cool. There's a guy out there named Eli Gilbert who I have partnered up with. And Eli is one of these dudes who just has a knack for dissecting a banjo player's style, or listening to recordings and transcribing it and really getting into cool ideas and figuring things out note for note. And what he is offering for the $4 per month level on Patreon for any of these episodes that I do where I interview a player, that's almost all of them, he's going to create a custom video lesson with tablature for those Patreon supporters. So, in other words, he just finished his first one that was based on the Matthew Davis episodes, where he's giving you a video and tablature tips of some of the playing advice that Matt actually gives on the podcast. So it's kind of a custom partnership where he listens to the podcast interview and then creates a lesson for those Patreon supporters based on that. So it's super cool, and it's only $4 a month, and you're basically getting free lessons out of it, and knowing that you are supporting this podcast. And so I think it's a win-win situation all the way around. So check that out, patreon.com/banjopodcast. And I wanted to make sure to mention that if any of you out there are Patreon supporters at $4 a month or higher, you should have received a link from me regarding the Eli Gilbert video and the tab sheet. I just want to make sure that that's working. I haven't, a lot of you have given me feedback that you enjoyed the video and stuff like that, but I haven't heard from anybody who is saying that they didn't get it and they were supposed to. So it seems like it's working okay, but it's the first time I've tried to do that stuff on Patreon. So if for some reason you have not received your link to the Eli Gilbert video, please let me know about that, and I will make sure to get that fixed. But as far as I can tell, that's all working smooth, which is great news, of course. The other things you can do to stay connected with me and with the podcast is to follow me on social media. Track me down. I am Picky Fingers on Facebook. If you're on Instagram, make sure to follow Picky_Fingers. That's me in the podcast. And then if you're on Twitter, I'm just at Banjo Podcast. So I'm always putting information about the episodes out there and announcements when each episode hits. So that's a good way to make sure you don't miss out on any of that. And of course, as always, you can email the show. That would be pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. I get all sorts of emails from you, and I love it all. Everything from banjo advice that you're asking about specific banjos, suggestions for guests on the episodes. I really dig hearing about that. And then just, of course, your random everyday comments and feedback. And like I said, I love it all. Keep it coming. pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Today's episode is a little bit of a new idea. I've had different playing advice episodes, of course, in the past, but this is the first one where I've set it up as me taking a lesson, and the teacher in this case is somebody who, if you have been a regular listener to the podcast, you already know him. It's Davey Jones, and he was in episode number 1. So, longtime friend of mine and one of my best banjo playing pals up here in Michigan. He wanted to. I pitched the idea of him teaching a lesson for the podcast. He thought it would be really cool to go through how to construct a chord melody arrangement. And I thought that was a really cool idea, especially because, as you'll hear him observe, a few of my recent guests have talked about doing chord melody arrangements, but in the normal interviews, we don't really get a chance to drill down as far as how to do that. So that's what Davey's going to do. It's definitely not a beginner lesson. You are going to want to make sure that you know, like, your chord inversions up and down the neck. From there, you probably just want to follow the tab sheet to get you started. So there is a tab sheet that accompanies this, and you can download that by going to libsyn.com. That's libsyn.com/banjopodcast. And the listing under this episode, there will be a button with big capital letters that says tab sheet. And if you click the download button by there, that should get you what you need. But if for some reason you're unable to access that, again, just give me an email, pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com, and I will send that right off to you. So yeah, I'd say this is an intermediate lesson, although he definitely leaves open a lot of possibilities so that even if you're an advanced player, there will be endless ways to take advantage of this information. So should be good, useful stuff. The tune that he has prepared for you is an old American classic, Home on the Range. Any of us in the States are probably familiar with this tune. I'm not sure how far it has spread outside the States, but we tried to pick one that was going to be familiar to most of you, and I think this fits that bill. So next episode, I'll be back to normal stuff, interviews with more fantastic players. I have some really cool ones coming up for you. But for now, a really cool change of pace, learning these chord melodies from Davey Jones. So pull that tab sheet up and take a listen to Davey. He's going to start off by just playing through his arrangement of Home on the Range, and then we'll get into the actual lesson. So yeah, pull up that tab sheet, follow along, and enjoy. And this is where I quit babbling and get on with the episode. Here you go. So I'm here with Davey Jones, as you, of course, know him from episode 1, his groundbreaking episode 1. And we
Historical, episode 1.
and we thought it'd be a great idea, or at least a novel idea, to have another one of these lesson-oriented instructional episodes, but have it be set up as an actual lesson. So I come to Davey here as a student today to learn about some incredible topic that he has prepared for me. And hey, Davey, how's it going?
Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
The thought of me teaching you anything is very funny to me.
I hope to demonstrate how not funny it should really be. What topics should we get into today?
So I've been thinking a lot recently about chord melody arrangements, and you've done some episodes you did an episode with Matthew Davis, who talked a little bit about this, and I think Mike Sumner talked about it too.
I think you're right.
Both of whom, are incredible banjo players and, have incredible ideas. So I thought maybe we'd do something, relatively digestible for listeners to get into, and see if we can kind of shed some light on how this whole thing works.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because they both did mention that, although I don't think we went into much depth in terms of if there are people who don't know what they mean by chord melody or how you might
and it's
then
maybe not the most common thing that you see on banjo, and with banjo players sort of historically, it's probably something that we see a little bit more currently, with more contemporary players, but you're not going to hear this if you're listening to mostly bluegrass or Earl Scruggs. You might hear some of it. I feel like maybe Alan Shelton, someone like that, started doing a lot of chord melody stuff early on.
Okay. So what is it, and how do we know if we've heard it or what it sounds like?
So the basic idea is that we're going to take a melody and we're going to put it on oftentimes one or two strings. So usually our highest strings on our instrument. The reason we do that is because your highest strings, your highest notes that you're playing, are generally going to be the ones that your ear hears the most readily. Right?
Okay.
So if we put a melody on our first string, and then we add other notes to it, basically, we're harmonizing that note as we go.
Okay.
If the note is on the highest string, then your ear most readily hears that note
Kind of
first.
identifies that as
Right.
the one that it's supposed to
Right.
focus on.
Now, the harmonies that we're adding onto it are often notes that exist within the chord, either the underlying chord, the chord that the band would be playing, or sometimes a passing chord moving from one chord to another inversion of that same chord. But they're harmony notes that exist within these chords of oftentimes the diatonic scale. So we call it a chord melody, because we've added chords to these melodies as we move up and down the neck, right?
Yeah, and the diatonic scale being just the major scale,
Right.
is like the set of notes
Right.
that you typically have to choose from. And of course there are tons of exceptions, but
Of course,
That's-
yeah. So I was listening to your episode on harmonies and adding harmonies.
Right.
I'm going to plug your podcast on your podcast, but it's a great episode, and that has a lot of sort of the foundation of what we need to do this sort of thing, right? So,
okay.
and you explain it wonderfully. So we're using the notes.
And this is G major, it looks
From our
like.
G major scale. Okay. We're generally picking notes from that scale. Okay, so the difference between what you did in that episode and what we're going to do here is somewhat slight. You're often adding, so for instance, if you had a melody note that was on a G, or you started with I'll Fly Away, I think was the song.
Yes.
Right. You were adding harmony notes on top of or higher than what you were playing for the melody. So
Yes.
you were playing, right? So your melody note was lower than the harmony note that you were adding.
Yep.
which is a slight difference to what we're doing here because we want the melody to be very forward in what we're playing. So we're adding harmony notes that are tonally below the melody notes that we're playing, right? So instead of, for instance, adding a harmony that's a third above the melody that we're playing, we are adding a harmony that is, so if my melody note is a G, and my harmony note is going to be below it, it's going to be a D, which is what, a fourth below?
Yes.
And then we're adding another one below it, and we'll get more into how this is specifically constructed. But we're adding two notes basically below, right? So the song that we're going to do is Home on the Range.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. So let's start with that then. So let's try to get the melody under your fingers.
Okay.
So let's try to put it all on your top.
And we actually have two banjos for this episode. I brought mine too to help me figure this out. So hopefully it won't be too confusing. Davey's playing a really nice open back. Is that a 12-inch open back too?
12-inch pot, yeah. This is
it's really cool.
And it's a cherry banjo, so it's super, super warm.
So you'll probably be able to hear the difference. I got my good old trusty bluegrass instrument here, and maybe we'll pan them off to one side and another to help separate
the banjo.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do.
And hey, real quick, let me interrupt. So you were pointing out some of the differences between, for example, what I taught in terms of standard harmonies versus chord melodies. It seems like chord melody approach might lend itself more to like solo playing,
and things
or something like that.
That's an awesome point to bring up. Chord melody is traditionally either a classical or a jazz guitar sort of method, right? So it's something that's used more often for solo performances, right? So we're able to play a melody unaccompanied, but generally accompany ourselves, right? So while what you're doing with that harmony episode might be to find a harmony to play with another instrument, or you're sort of arpeggiating the harmony, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to just play all those harmonies at once at the same time.
Yeah,
right?
Accompanying yourself is a really cool way of that's a cool way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's almost like we're trying to accomplish this almost like a cappella version, this barbershop quartet on a banjo, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Barbershop triplet, I guess, on a banjo, depending on how many notes you can play at once. So that's sort of the idea. We're self-accompanying, and we're playing almost what these vocal lines might be, but the melody is going to be out front, hopefully, and that's what you want the listener's ear to hear. So that's what we're going for.
All right. So first step is what then?
So let's get the melody.
Yeah, cool. And this is on the tab sheet, I assume, right? Or
yes, it will be. Yes.
Okay.
So I'll start that tab sheet out with just the melody on the first string, right? And for the purpose of this arrangement, we're going to keep the melody solely on the first string.
Okay, great.
Which makes it nice and simple.
And we are in G.
We're in G, right?
So, if anyone's familiar with your G major scale, you can focus on that.
Right. Yeah, and we can go right up the G major scale. On one string, we can go down to, and those are going to be the only notes that we're going to play, at least for the simpler version of this song. And I've tabbed out sort of two versions, and we'll talk about how each of those works.
Yeah, cool.
In a little bit. So let's find that melody first.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with just that for now. Okay, so first we'll try to add just one harmony below. Okay, so our first two melody notes are a D, open first string.
Right.
So it is also, and maybe we should do this first, we should talk about the underlying chords, or the chords that the band would be playing, right? Because those are going to relatively dictate the notes that we're going to add in terms of the melody, right? So this first version that we're going to learn is a simple 1-4-5 the whole time.
Okay.
So it's starting, go ahead and play the melody with me, and I'll play the chords, and I'll name them out. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, G, back to C, back to G, D. Okay, so we'll start with that.
Yeah, okay.
So we're starting D, D, G, C, or I'm sorry, A, B. Okay. So all of that is over a G chord. Okay. So we're going to try to add G chord tones to that as we go, and we're going to add the notes below it. Okay. So our first note, open D on the first string.
Right.
Okay. So what do you think would be a proper note within the G chord to add below that?
We're doing one note?
We're doing one note for now. Yeah,
Okay.
we're just going to add one note, and then we'll add more as we go.
Well, the way I would think about it is that since the banjo is tuned in open G, we know that that's a G chord with that D note at the top. So the next note down from that is the open B string.
Right.
So B seems to be a good candidate for us.
Absolutely. So we'll add those two notes, and we'll play those together. Right? And that sounds nice.
Yeah.
Okay, now our next melody note is going to be a G, a higher G. So we'll just move up, and we'll add the third fret of the second string. So we'll add a D. Right. So we're just basically moving up the inversions or the voicings here.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you can think about it as playing your typical G chord, except you're just leaving out a couple of those lower notes.
Our
at least
F
for now.
shape, or F-shaped G chord, if we want to call it that, right?
Right.
The first one we're using what we would call the bar shape, or the open tuning of the instrument, right? So, okay, now our next note is an A, which isn't in the chord, isn't in a G chord. We're still over a G chord.
Right.
So this is more of a passing melody note, right? We're headed up to the next note. So we need to find something that tonally works with this, right? So we have a couple options here to try, and this is where we need to figure out what works best, right?
Yeah.
Now, the important thing to note here is that at the end of all of this, the determining factor is going to be what sounds best, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to try potentially a couple different harmonies at different points and see what actually sounds good, okay? So we're going to try to add notes within the scale and just see how they sound, right?
Yeah.
It's one way of looking at it. So let's try, first of all, to add the 5th fret of the 2nd string and see how that sounds. Yeah. What do you think?
I'm not sure what I think until I compare it to maybe something else, but I'm listening.
Let's move up to the next melody note to see how, just to give it a little more context. So the next melody note is going to be a B up in the 9th fret of the 1st string. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And we can harmonize that as well. That's going to be an easy one to kind of figure out because it's going to be, we're moving up, that's a chord tone.
Yep.
And we can just move up another inversion, right? Or another voicing.
Yeah, so now you're up to the higher G shape. I guess we'd call it a D
shape.
A D-shaped chord,
right.
Played at the 8th. Is that 8th fret? 9th
fret.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's listen to that again. So we've got... It's a little weird to me.
Yeah. I'd like to experiment a little bit with that.
To me, that sounds too parallel. It sounds like too much parallel movement.
Right. exactly.
The harmony isn't super pleasing in terms of this song, at least, right? And we can start to see how these passing notes are a little tougher to figure out what's going to work. The next one I'm going to try is the next note up on the scale, which is an F sharp, which is the 7th fret of the 2nd string.
Right. So we're still just focusing on harmonizing that
that A note.
The A note.
Yeah,
right,
the
right.
note passing from
yeah,
a
that's
G
the only one we're changing for
up
now.
to a B. So let's try that one. Go ahead
Okay.
and give it a shot. Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah, that is cooler.
And what are our other options even here, right? We could keep the first finger on the 3rd fret if you want to go for a pretty gnarly stretch here. That's kind of, I mean, it sounds okay, but it's kind of weird to me, right? To do that.
Right.
Well, we might end up doing that at some point anyways. So I think let's go with for now.
Yes, I agree that between those two that we tried, that's definitely the way to go.
Okay, so now if you look on the tab, you'll see that I've added. We're playing 3 total notes, right? We're playing a full chord for all of these things.
So we have to do this whole process one more time or one more layer to it.
We definitely can if we want it to sound fuller, right? And this is a good way to just play full chord forms.
Yeah.
Right. So what I've done there is I've added on the first 2 notes, I've added a G, the low G, right? So we've got that full G chord.
Right.
And then I'm moving up to my F shape. Right. And then I've added another harmony onto that 7 and 7 that we've got there. And you can either bar on the 7th fret, and we're basically playing a D chord, right? And this ends up being a D passing chord from our F shape G to a
right. So hopefully, individually, these are all chords that everyone's already familiar with, and it's just a matter of piecing them together for now.
Yeah, and that's where a little bit of sort of taste and using your ear is going to come into consideration, right? So we can definitely move up with different harmonies, and as we add more harmonies, especially if we add a 3rd harmony down below or a 4th harmony, then we have additional options that we can add to it, right? So that D passing chord. Okay, so in the first version of the song that I've tabbed out, which is just a simpler, kind of more straightforward in terms of harmonies, we're playing that bar D shape.
Yeah.
Right? Now, certainly another option, and especially in the key of G, we love to have that D7 chord with a C below where we are, right?
Right, so that's on the top 3 strings, that's 5, 7, 7.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really high quality passing chord in the key of G, and it adds a nice little tension that we want to resolve with the G, right?
Yeah, it does give it a little more movement.
Right. So depending on what you like and what your taste is, you can add that sort of different harmony, right? So we have oftentimes multiple options here. And again, the last resort, the thing that you're going to trust the most to figure out what works best is your ear. So,
yeah, cool. The Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Deering Banjos, who want you to know that banjo teachers love good times. In a recent survey conducted by Deering, over 200 banjo teachers were asked, how likely is it that you would recommend the good time banjo to your students? An overwhelming 85% responded that they would, with the number one reason being that good times are easy to play. Even Good Time Ambassador and 2019 IBMA Banjo Player of the Year Kristen Scott Benson agrees. that you will not find a better banjo than this in the price range of the Deering Good Time. With the Good Time banjos, Deering understands the importance of starting out with a banjo that will help, not hinder, your banjo learning experience, which is why they make sure that each and every Good Time banjo leaves looking great, feeling great, and sounding great. For more information and to see exclusive videos from Good Time ambassadors Kristen Scott Benson and Pete Wernick, head over to deeringbanjos.com/teacherslovegoodtimes. I catch myself and maybe this is an extra, maybe you were going to get to this, so sorry if I'm, again, stealing your thunder, but I catch myself wanting to do, rather than chunk chords like that, kind of do a little sweepy pick.
Yeah. And I love that.
Gives a little more of a stately...
This is why you're a great student, Keith. You've got all these amazing ideas. Yeah, now, when it comes to all of this, so in the tab that I've sort of made for all of you, it's very straightforward in terms of what I've tabbed out and what is literally there to play, right? And it's what I would consider relatively boring, okay? Right? It's really blocky. It's all just on a beat, right? And it's just, we're just chopping, not really chopping, but we're sort of 3-finger pinching on all those chords, right?
Yeah.
And the point you brought up is a really, really important one with all this stuff, because it needs to breathe. It needs to have feeling, right? So we need to find ways within our personal taste and, within our personal abilities, what we can do with our playing to make this live more and sound better. Mm-hmm. And that's a perfect example of what we can do, right? So oftentimes I wouldn't play it like that at all.
Okay.
I would do something similar to what you're doing right there. Or I might play
what's
like
that one?
That's a kind of a slow rake with my thumb over the strings, and I'm playing a kind of interesting chord form here that uses my first finger back on the 5th fret of the 4th string, and then I'm otherwise playing a D shape, but with 2, 3, and 4. Right, so I'm getting the root of that G chord down there on the 4th string.
Yep.
Right.
Cool.
It's just a different voicing, and it's somewhat more interesting voicing of that G chord. Right. So. Yeah, and we can kind of rake across it with our thumb to get something that sounds like that.
Yeah.
Oops, I played a fancy chord that we're not going to get into yet.
Okay.
And we should talk about our chord substitution sometime soon. But the important thing to note here is that the taste is sort of your little piece of art that you're going to add to all of this stuff, right? So once you understand how to move through the chord inversions and play the melodies with the harmonies below it, and once you get it in your fingers, then you need to learn how to play it in a way that has feeling and it has some sort of performative value, right?
Yeah.
Something that people would want to listen to.
So right after the part where we left off, which would be... what's the next thing? Is that...
So the chord changes here. Chord changes to a C, yeah. So there's another, instance of where we have a couple options, things to play there, right? We could play an A minor with our 2nd finger on the 3rd string, which was your first idea. Doesn't necessarily work. It might be better as a C, right? Another thing to note is as I'm moving from my G and I play that F sharp note, I'm oftentimes playing that as just a single string instead of...
That's actually what I was wanting to get at was some of these melody notes are not
harmonizable.
Chord melodies,
Yeah.
per se. And
Some of them might not work as a harmony, right? They might sound a little too weird, no matter what we do. And sometimes we want to, once again, according to our taste, not always play everything as a harmony, right? So it doesn't all need to be harmonized. So on that note down, that F sharp down from our G. Okay. So we could do that one a couple ways. We could do just from our G, our F shape, G, we could drop the third finger down on the fourth fret to get that note.
Right.
And we could keep those other fingers there and basically play either a B minor chord or a G major 7, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
Like that, if we want to harmonize it. I don't think it's fully necessary to harmonize that one. That sound is a little outside of what I would consider kind of worthwhile in this simple folk tune. I guess we could play it as a D chord, like that.
Right.
That's 2nd fret, 3rd fret, and 4th fret. Right. Starts to get a little too choppy when we're trying to play all these as chords all the time, though. Yeah, the D7 is nice.
But it's still a little, almost sounds like, it can sound like a toddler banging on a piano if you just are stabbing these
it's just
chords.
all these staccato sort of things going on if you start to try to play everything, really harmonize. I guess we can slow it down, something like that, but, that's an option for sure.
Okay.
I've chosen to just play that single note on the way down.
Yeah.
Right? And when I go back, sometimes it's really nice to alternate between single notes and harmonized notes, right? It adds a nice feel to it.
Right.
Okay.
So it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for taste, even if we all agree on the exact same notes. There are different ways. For example, what we were just doing, you could keep those notes ringing while you play that, or you could not.
Right. Absolutely.
There's that opportunity. There's what you just said.
Yeah. So again, I guess we sort of have some steps here to follow.
Yeah.
Maybe we should sort of clarify those.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So step 1, we need to find our melody. Okay. And if you can put it on your highest string or your second string, depending on what you need to do, what you need to accomplish, just get that melody in your fingers. It needs to be, sort of need to know it inside and out. Right, both the intervals in your head and the intervals that exist on the string, right? How much you need to be jumping up and down. And then we need to think of just the harmony notes, right? Try to find harmony notes that sound good and work with the underlying chords that exist in the song. So the underlying chords are going to be something that you'll have to sort of figure out or look up or, what are our options there, Yeah. Basically just look them up or figure them out, I guess.
Right, and it might be easier to approach this with a song that you already know. Would probably make it easier to at least hear if you're playing an incorrect harmony or...
Right. And start with something that's, sort of in your wheelhouse theory-wise, right? If this is your first chord melody arrangement and you're trying to arrange something, you're trying to arrange Moon River or something, a lot of those harmonies are going to be outside of what you know, what you can feel, and what you can find.
Yeah.
We have to develop a certain, sense of sophistication with harmony before we move on to things that are more sophisticated and complicated, right?
Yeah.
So start with a simple folk tune like this. See if you can figure out the harmonies, and go from there. Okay, and then what's our next step then?
So we've figured out the melody.
We figured out our harmonies that follow it, harmonies that sound good to us.
Yeah.
And then we need to, I guess, step 3, find a way to play it that sort of appeals to you and you think will appeal to, the listener's ears.
Yeah.
Something that feels good, something that sounds good. And then just play it a ton, right? These things have to be played a lot to the point that they're, within your muscle memory in your fingers, and you don't have to think about them too hard. You can truly just feel them, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so a good thing to discuss here. So that second version that we have, okay. You'll notice in that second version that I've basically added a bunch of extra chords into it, right? Mm-hmm. And a good episode, another Picky Fingers plug here, is your episode on passing chords. Right? So I've added some what we would consider passing chords in this arrangement, right? And I've also added some what we would consider perhaps chord substitutions, right?
Okay.
Chords that are replacing your standard sort of 1, 4, 5 chords, right? And the common thread that you'll see in those chords and the passing chords and the substitutions is that they also contain the melody notes, even though the notes within the chords themselves might be somewhat outside of the key, right?
Okay.
So a good example of that is that A major chord in measure 39 of this arrangement that I've come up with. You can see that there is a chord substitution here. We're going from in measure 38 a G, and then measure 39 an A7, and then to a D7, right? And so basically what we're doing is we're moving from this G eventually to the D7, and we're using sort of an intermediary chord that exists in between the two. And it is a bridge between the two. And you'll notice that A7 chord both contains the melody note, which is a G.
Right.
And we move down to an F sharp, back up to a G, up to a D7. But it also contains an A, which is in the key, and a C sharp, which is outside of the key.
Which is not, right.
Right, which these sorts of things, we would call this a major 2 chord. The 2 chord in the key of G is supposed to be in A minor, but we've stretched it a little bit to make it sound a little bit more dissonant.
Yeah.
Right? Add a little extra tension, right? Sometimes in the right place, that tension can be really satisfying sounding, right?
Okay.
This is one of those situations where we're going from a 1 chord to a major 2 to a 5 chord, right? The D7, right?
Okay.
And that little bit of extra tension is really satisfying to us, right? So this is just a chord substitution to go from that 1 chord to the 5 chord.
Okay.
Right? So we are, let's see.
Yeah, it definitely sounds really musical. It doesn't sound out of place.
Right. Yeah, and it sounds a little more interesting than what we were doing before. I think it was just something like that. Or maybe it was... Right? And instead of doing it that way, we're doing...
Yeah, cool.
Right? So it's just a little extra musical bridge. Something to add a little bit of tension in the right spot. And tension is always, tension can go either way. Tension can be horrible sounding or it can be wonderful sounding.
Right,
as long as it's relieved, as long as it's resolved in the right way.
Yeah, tastefully done. Exactly.
And your episode on passing chords talks about that in a really perfect way, right? That D7 chord, we hear that chord and we want it to resolve to...
Yeah.
That G major chord, right?
Yeah.
So this second arrangement is adding tension in certain places. We've got some chord substitutions, right? A classic one, we're going from a G to a G7 to a C, right?
Uh-huh.
Right. That's our G7 up here on 7, 6, and 9.
Right.
And then there's our C. And then this is one of my favorite in the world. This is a minor 4 chord, right? So that's a C minor chord. And that's a pretty classic, I would say it's a classic kind of folk chord progression. Maybe it exists in bluegrass a little bit too, but a G, G7, C, C minor. Right. It's a really nice movement, right? So...
Yeah, it's cool enough to be surprising, but not jolt you out of enjoying the piece of music.
Mm-hmm. It's also got a certain mood to it, right? It's got this kind of sweet sadness to it that I think fits this kind of tune. This kind of Americana tune.
It serves it well
in a cool way. I've also in the chorus I've substituted what I think was a. So in the chorus, I've substituted what was a D. So we've got... I've substituted that D or that D7 with an A minor chord.
Yeah, what measure are you on now?
I'm on measure 45... I'm sorry. 50, right? So I'm on measure 50. I'm starting
where it starts with that big 12 bar chord.
Which could be cool to play as a harmonic, by the way. Okay, so we've got a... Yeah, and that little guy is an interesting one as well. That's a diminished chord.
Yeah.
And I think that you actually talked about that specific diminished chord in your passing chord episode as well. It's not... technically a C-sharp diminished chord, but it's more or less one and the same. There's really only 3 diminished chords, and that's a whole thing.
Right.
That's a whole thing to talk about. Okay, but anyways, we're going instead of G, D7 to G for the chorus. We're going G, A minor. G. Okay, so.
Yeah.
Right. And that one note that we're going down to the B flat instead of an A for a melody note. So we're actually substituting a melody note right there too.
Okay.
To add a little bit of extra tension.
Getting a little extra crazy, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully this gives some listeners some ideas of how to make things a little more varied from just our plain, straight up diatonic ideas.
Right. And it sounds like the most important thing is to just keep that melody note strong. And from there, you could take a really straight ahead formula, staying to the diatonic, or almost any chord that you think of that has that melody note at the top is maybe a candidate for a cool chord substitution, and it's just a matter of personal taste as to which ones to choose. So there are a lot of choices and a lot of potential for creativity. Even with a fixed melody. Yeah, I mean, just see what you can mess around with, right? Move your fingers around to play the different diatonic chords that exist, right? Or, if your ear can hear these things, move them around to play different diatonic chords, non-diatonic chords, right? See if you can get some interesting harmonies in there. There's all sorts of things that you can do to make things just sound a little more interesting, a little more tense. Yeah. And then resolve it in just the right way, right? Yeah. Any questions? So beyond experimenting with different chords and different harmonies, what other advice do you have maybe to someone who wants to stick to the simpler chords and maybe isn't ready for the complicated chords? Is there anything else they can do to make it because you described it as kind of boring, and I'm just kind of wondering, what about it? I don't know. What would you do to make that not as boring?
Yeah, so I guess if your fingers can't hit those, if your left hand can't hit those, sort of more complicated harmonies, you can kind of rhythmically dress it up, right? If your right hand can do this sort of thing, and it's not necessarily that technically challenging to, for instance, play it with a little more rubato, right? Which is an Italian word for robbed time, right? Which basically means...
I didn't even know that. That's great.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. So we're basically playing it, outside of sort of standard metronome time, right? We're halting in certain places, and we're pausing, and we're speeding certain parts up or slowing certain parts down as the feeling dictates, right? So
Which I guess is another part of the beauty of maybe a solo...
Totally.
Music form.
Totally.
Where you don't have to worry about not being in sync with your
again, it can,
guitar player.
It can breathe, right?
Yeah,
you can let it breathe. You can play it how you want. So you can change the rhythm to suit you, speed it up and slow it down. You can syncopate it, I guess, in different ways. You could add a little bit of, a rhythmic variation to the melody.
Okay. What are are you able to...
Let me think. Yeah, we can always shift melody notes just a little bit to get a little bit of syncopation. We can also swing it, right? And swing is a nice way to add a little bit of, extra and different feel to what we're doing. A lot of times, with something like this, I might start with...
Yeah, make it the true cowboy ballad that it is, right?
The old horse galloping.
Yeah, some cactuses.
So there's a little bit of swing in there, and
right.
It's got some different feel to it, right?
That adds a lot just from the rump, 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 rump.
Exactly.
Rump, 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 rump.
Totally, yeah. And
makes a big difference.
Has a different sort of breath to it, different life to it. So, always outside of harmonic, variation, we have rhythmic variation, which is a really cool thing that Matt Davis talked about. I thought that was really fascinating. His sort of forays into that.
It sure was. That's stuff that I'll be working on for years.
Yeah, right.
Just from the couple of comments that he made about that.
Exactly, yeah.
Going back to rubato, I feel like, so you just demonstrated maybe a little rubato, but mostly like that swing tempo. What would be, demonstrate a bit of more rubato-ness in an arrangement?
It speeds up and slows down.
Right. Or maybe pauses at the end of the line before it picks back up.
Yeah, and let it just drag it out. Let that note sink in to the listener's ears, and then move on from it. And the rubato is a really big thing in a lot of classical music.
Sure.
Right? And classical music has to, have that sort of emotional ebb and flow. So that's a thing that you'll hear a lot in sort of that tradition of music, and we're working roughly within the same, maybe not the same tradition, but a similar tradition. We're following in that sort of footstep when we're playing stuff like this.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks. I think this gives us quite a few ideas of things to work on, and now we all have to go back through every tune we know and
harmonize.
Learn chord ballady versions of everything. Just fiddle tunes everywhere. That'll be great.
That would be wild.
Thanks a lot. And it's slightly off of this specific topic, but I see you posting a lot of, it seems like you've been on a big like Joplin ragtime kick recently. Just, I don't know, talk for a minute about what you've been enjoying doing, and maybe plug your whatever YouTube channels or websites that people can check out what you're doing with, because it is a little off the beaten path of the bluegrass that a lot of us know.
Yeah, I've it hasn't even been that recent of an obsession. I feel like maybe when we did our original episode, I was really into the Joplin thing, or at least the classic banjo stuff. But I've sort of become obsessed with Scott Joplin and his his compositions and just his incredible just array of work, which spans everything from your standard ragtime tunes that we've all heard a million times, The Entertainer and Maple Leaf Rag and stuff like that, to an opera that he composed later in his life that
I didn't know about that.
It's insane. He's composed some incredible pieces of music and almost long flowing classical pieces that are just as beautiful as any sort of postmodern composer.
Yeah, cool.
But for a while I've been into just arranging Joplin pieces for banjo, just things that don't belong on the instrument.
And oftentimes for two banjos.
And is that right? Yeah, oftentimes for two banjos. So I'll arrange the left hand of the piano for one banjo and the right hand for another. And then when you play them together, it sounds like a wild carnival. it's pretty amazing. So I post that kind of stuff on my, like on my Instagram, which is DW Banjones, just a classic banjo pun and last name pun. I do have a YouTube channel that I neglect horribly that I need to actually, it's one of those things that I've been telling myself for years, like
it's on the list somewhere.
Yeah, I'm gonna start working on the YouTube channel. But,
of course.
Yeah. And my website is just michiganbanjo.com, which is hilarious that I ended up with that.
Right.
I sit around Ypsilanti and teach banjo most of the day. So
Ypsilanti is a real name of a city.
Ypsilanti,
just like Kalamazoo.
Isn't it crazy?
We're kind of
starts with a Y.
Right.
Goes right to a P. Just comes right out of the gate with a YP.
YPS. Yeah.
YPSI. Yeah, Ypsilanti. It's a Greek name. But I have some designs to record a record of Joplin, all Joplin tunes.
Whoa, that would be great.
Yeah, and probably some with a piano player, some with just me doing two banjos, maybe a couple with other banjo players. I've been playing with Aaron a little bit, which has been really fun to play classic banjo tunes with him.
Of course.
He lightly ribs me about wearing picks, which is, I guess it's against the rules, but it's...
A light ribbing from a Midwesterner is about as extreme as it gets.
Exactly.
So, you should be deeply hurt.
But that's pretty much it. That's my plugs.
Cool. So check that out. Thanks for the chord melody info, and hope to catch up with you again sometime for my next lesson.
I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining me for this episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Great big extra special thanks to Davey Jones for teaching us all about these chord melodies. Really great stuff. Hope you all enjoyed it. I'll be back next time after the new year to give you a new lineup of special guests. Got some really great ones. I don't want you to miss any of them, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Also, if you're interested in those Eli Gilbert custom lessons for each of the guests that I have, please go sign up at patreon.com/banjopodcast. Find out all about that. It is well worth it, believe me. If you need to get a hold of the show, it's pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. But that does it for me. I hope you all have a great New Year's. I can't wait to see you all in 2020. And yeah, that's it. Till next time.